Chapter 1. The Whispering Snows of a Lost Home. In the far northern reaches of Japan, on the wild and untamed island of Izo, there stands a solitary, majestic sentinel known as Mount Yōtei. Its peak, a perfect cone perpetually robed in snow, pierces the sky, a silent god watching over a land of stark and profound beauty. The slopes of this great mountain were once home to a small, peaceful village, a community that lived in harmonious rhythm with the harsh yet generous seasons. The air here was always crisp, carrying the clean scent of pine and the distant, earthy promise of geothermal springs. In the winter, the world would fall into a deep, muffled silence, broken only by the soft crunch of snow underfoot and the occasional cry of a distant fox. It was in this tranquil, isolated world that a young girl named Atsu first opened her eyes. Her childhood was a tapestry woven with simple, beautiful threads. Her father was a woodcarver, a man of few words whose calloused hands could coax the spirits of the forest from blocks of cedar and cherry wood. He taught Atsu how to listen to the grain of the wood, to feel the life within it, and to guide her knife with a respect that was akin to prayer. Her mother was a weaver, her loom clicking a steady, comforting rhythm that filled their small home. She taught Atsu the old patterns, the ones that told stories of the kami, the spirits that resided in every rock, stream, and animal. From her, Atsu learned that the world was alive with unseen presences, that the wind had a voice and the snow a memory. Atsu's days were spent in exploration. She knew every hidden path that wound through the dense bamboo groves, every clearing where the sunbeams broke through the canopy to dapple the forest floor. She would spend hours by the steaming, mineral-rich hot springs, watching the vapor rise to meet the cold air, feeling the very breath of the mountain on her face. She learned which berries were sweet and which were bitter, where the rabbits made their warrens, and how to track a deer by the faintest impression in the moss. This was not merely survival. It was a conversation with the world around her. She was not separate from the mountain. She was a part of its living, breathing essence. The peace of Yōtei was not just around her. It was within her, a deep, unshakable calm that she believed was as eternal as the stars. But the world beyond the mountain was changing. Whispers began to drift into the village, carried by traders and travelers with wary eyes. They spoke of a powerful new shogun in the south, of a nation being unified under a single iron will. They spoke of samurai, warriors of immense skill and discipline, who served this new order. At first, these stories were like distant thunder, a rumble that held no immediate threat. The elders would listen, their faces grave, and speak in low tones about the fragility of peace. They warned that the outside world, with its hunger for land and its love of steel, would one day look upon their secluded home not with reverence, but with avarice. That day arrived not with a declaration, but with the sound of a foreign axe biting into the heart of a sacred cedar. Atsu, high on a ridge gathering medicinal herbs, heard the sharp, violent crack echo through the still valley. It was a sound that did not belong, a discordant note in the mountain symphony. Peering through the trees, she saw them, men clad in imposing, lacquered armor, their movements efficient and devoid of any connection to the land. They were not asking the forest for permission, they were taking. They saw the ancient trees not as living spirits, but as timber, the mountain not as a guardian, but as a prize. A cold dread, colder than the deepest winter chill, began to coil in Atsu's stomach. She watched, helpless, as a giant tree, one her people had revered for generations, groaned its death knell and crashed to the earth, crushing the delicate life beneath it. The fear in the village became a palpable thing. The men sharpened old hunting blades, their hands trembling. The women gathered the children, their faces tight with a terror they tried to hide. The air, once filled with the sounds of life and craft, grew thick with an anxious silence. Atsu's father placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch heavy with a finality that made her want to cry. Her mother held her close, whispering a prayer to the mountain kami for protection. That night, no one slept. They sat in the dark, listening to the wind, waiting for the storm they knew was coming. The peace of Yōtei had been a beautiful dream, and now the waking world was about to descend with all its brutal, unforgiving force. The storm broke at dawn. There was no parley, no demand for surrender. The Yōtei Six and their retinue of warriors descended upon the village like a wave of fire and steel. Atsu, hidden in a camouflaged storage pit her father had built for emergencies, witnessed the end of her world through a narrow crack. She saw the thatched roofs ignited, the flames roaring skyward, their light painting the snow a hellish orange. She heard the shouts of the samurai, the clash of metal, and the screams of her people, screams that were abruptly, terribly cut short. She saw her father, armed with nothing but his carving knife, stand before a fully armored warrior. The movement was a blur, a single, fluid arc of the samurai's katana, and her father fell, his lifeblood staining the pure white snow. She did not see her mother fall, but she felt it. It was as if a vital string connecting her to the world had been violently snapped, leaving a silence inside her that was more deafening than any noise. When the sounds of battle finally ceased, replaced by the crackle of the consuming fire and the low, victorious shouts of the plunderers, Atsu remained in her hiding place, paralyzed. The world she knew was gone, replaced by a nightmare of smoke and death. The familiar, comforting sense of home were now the acrid stench of burning wood and flesh. The silence that returned was not the peaceful silence of the mountain, but the hollow, empty silence of a grave. After what felt like an eternity, she pushed open the cover of the pit and climbed out into the ruins. The village was gone. Her family was gone. Everything was gone. She stood alone in the devastation, a small, solitary figure in a vast landscape of loss. The gentle, curious girl named Atsu died there amidst the embers. What remained was a cold, hard core of grief, a void that had only one purpose: to fill itself with vengeance. Chapter 2. The Forging of a Ghost in the Wilderness. first days after the massacre were a blur of instinct and survival. Atsu fled into the embrace of the very forests that had once been her playground, now a refuge and a fortress. The cold, which had always been a manageable fact of life, now became a relentless enemy, biting at her exposed skin with teeth of ice. Hunger was a constant, gnawing companion. She ate frozen berries, dug for roots under the snow, and once managed to snare a rabbit, her hands shaking as she performed the necessary, grim task that her father had once done for her. Every snap of a twig sent her heart racing. Every distant sound was potentially a samurai patrol. The world was no longer a place of wonder, but a landscape of perpetual threat. Her body grew lean and hard, tempered by the relentless struggle to simply exist. But it was her spirit that underwent the most profound transformation. The initial, overwhelming grief did not soften with time, it crystallized. It became a sharp, focused point of intent. In the deep silence of the nights, huddled in caves, or nestled in the boughs of a great pine, she would replay the horrors she had witnessed. The face of the samurai who killed her father was seared into her memory. The arrogant stance of their leader, a man she would later learn was the master of the Yōtei 6, became the image she saw when she closed her eyes. These memories were no longer sources of paralyzing pain. They were fuel. They were the embers she fanned into a raging fire that warmed her against the cold and lit the dark path ahead of her. She knew that raw hatred was not enough. To challenge the Yōtei 6, she needed more than a peasant's rage. She needed a warrior's skill. She began to train, using the wilderness as her dojo. A sturdy, straight branch became her sword. She practiced for hours, swinging it against tree trunks until her arms screamed in protest and her hands were raw and blistered. She observed the predators of the forest, the wolf, with its patient, coordinated pack hunting, the owl with its silent, deadly strike from above, the fox, with its cleverness and guile. She did not seek to fight like a samurai, with honor and direct confrontation. She sought to fight like the mountain itself, using the environment as a weapon, striking from concealment, using fear and confusion as her allies. Her journey was one of solitary endurance. She traversed the length and breadth of Izo, from the storm-lashed coasts where the sea crashed against black rocks, to the frozen, windswept passes high on Yōtei slopes. She learned to move without a sound, her footsteps becoming as light as a falling leaf. She learned to control her breath, to still her heart even in moments of extreme danger, to become a part of the shadows. She practiced with a found weapon, a discarded naginata, a blade on a long pole that suited her style perfectly. It allowed her to keep her distance, to use the leverage of the wood, to sweep and cut with a grace that was both beautiful and lethal. She was no longer just a survivor. She was an instrument of vengeance being honed to a razor's edge. During her travels, she encountered other outcasts and remnants of broken communities, hunters displaced from their lands, Ainu villagers hiding from the encroaching samurai influence. From them, she learned more than just survival skills. She learned the lay of the land, the secret paths, the hidden valleys. She also learned the names. The Yōtei Six were not a faceless entity anymore. They were individuals with names, habits, and territories. The brutal swordsman, the cunning archer, the ruthless commander. She listened to stories of their cruelty, of other villages subjugated, of other lives ruined. Her personal vengeance began to intertwine with a broader sense of justice. She was not just avenging her family. She was becoming a symbol of resistance for all those who had suffered under the heel of the new, unforgiving order. Years passed. The softness of the girl was gone forever, carved away by hardship and purpose. Her eyes, once bright with curiosity, now held the calm, penetrating gaze of a predator. She could sit for an entire day in absolute stillness, waiting for her prey. She could cross a room full of dry twigs without making a sound. The mountain had forged her. The memory of her loss fueled her, and her skills were now perfected. The time for waiting was over. The ghost was fully formed, and it was ready to walk. Atsu, the daughter of the village, was a memory. The Onryō, the ghost of Yōtei, was ready to begin her haunting. Chapter 3. The haunting begins the first fall. The first target was the one whose face was clearest in her memory, Cage, the swordsman. He had been the one to cut down her father, his technique flawless and devoid of emotion. He had since been granted a small, fortified manor on a conquered tract of land, ruling over the local peasants with a cruel and heavy hand. Atsu observed his domain for days from the cover of the surrounding woods. She noted the patrols of his guards, their routines, their moments of inattention. She saw the fear in the eyes of the farmers who worked his fields, a fear that mirrored her own from years past. This was not just a target. This was a cancer that needed to be cut out. She chose a moonless night, when the world was drowned in an inky blackness that was her greatest ally. Dressed in dark, practical clothing that allowed for silent movement, her face smudged with ash, she became a wisp of shadow. She avoided the main gate, instead scaling the wooden palisade at a point where the guards' footsteps had just faded. She moved across the courtyard like a breath of wind, her naginata held close to her body. She was inside his manor before any alarm could be raised. Her presence as undetectable as a thought. She found Cage not in a grand hall, but in his private dojo, practicing his forms by the light of a single lantern. He was still a formidable sight, his movements precise and powerful. He did not hear her enter. He only sensed a change in the air, a subtle drop in temperature, a presence where there should be none. He turned, his katana flashing up into a guard position, and he saw her. Not a woman, not a warrior, but a specter. Her eyes held no fear, no anger, only a cold, implacable certainty that was far more terrifying. There is no honor in this, he spat, trying to reassert the code by which he lived. Honor died with my family in the snow, Atsu replied, her voice a low, calm whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I am not here for honor. I am here for justice. The fight was short and brutal. Cage was a master of the open duel, of the exchange of blows on a flat field. Atsu was a master of the confined space, of using the environment. She used the Naginata's reach to keep him at bay, her strikes not aimed to clash with his sword, but to find the gaps in his armor, the weak points at his joints. She was like water, flowing around his rigid attacks. When he lunged, she was no longer there. When he swung, her blade was already biting into the back of his knee. He fell with a cry of shock and pain, his sword clattering to the wooden floor. The last thing he saw was the serene, snow-cooled face of the ghost he had helped create, and the glint of her descending blade. She left as silently as she had arrived, melting back into the forest before the first guard discovered the body. But she left a message, a single, small wood carving, a fox, her father's signature, placed upon Cage's chest. It was a signature, a promise. The ghost of Yōtei had claimed its first soul. The legend was born that night. In the taverns and around the hearths of the oppressed, people began to whisper. They spoke of a spirit of vengeance, an Onryō that could walk through walls and strike down the wicked without being seen. The Yōtei Six, who had felt untouchable in their power, now felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter wind. They had created this ghost, and now it was coming for them, one by one. Chapter 4. The Path of the Onryō, Justice and Burden. The death of Cage sent a ripple of fear through the ranks of the Yōtei Six. They increased their guards, fortified their holdings, and traveled with larger retinues. But a ghost cannot be kept out by walls alone. Atsu's campaign was a masterclass in psychological warfare. She was a rumor, a shadow, a story told to frighten children. She would strike when least expected, an arrow from a dense thicket that found the throat of the archer Toko during a boar hunt, a carefully staged rock slide that crushed the brutish berserker Bando and his entire patrol in a mountain pass. She was not just killing them, she was eroding their sense of security, proving that their power was an illusion that could be unmasked by a single, determined will. With each successful hunt, Atsu's skills grew sharper, but so did the weight on her soul. The initial, pure rush of vengeance began to give way to a more complex reality. Taking a life, even the life of a monster, was a heavy burden. In the silent moments after a kill, she would feel a profound emptiness. The fiery anger would subside, and she would be left alone with the memory of the girl she used to be. A girl who believed in the spirits within all things. Was she becoming the very thing she sought to destroy? A bringer of death, a creature of violence. She would look at her hands, now scarred and strong, and remember her father's hands, which created beauty from wood. The contrast was a constant, quiet agony. Her journey also forced her to confront the wider world she had been sheltered from. She saw the mechanisms of the new shogunate's control, the taxes that bled the people dry, the laws that displaced the Ainu from their ancestral lands, the sheer, grinding oppression that was the true face of this peace. Her quest for personal vengeance began to organically merge with the struggles of the people she encountered. She found herself intervening not just to get closer to her targets, but because it was the right thing to do. She would divert from her path to help a village fend off bandits who exploited the chaos, or to free a group of peasants unjustly imprisoned by a corrupt official. In doing so, she began to forge a different kind of connection. The people no longer saw her only as a terrifying ghost. They began to see her as a protector. They would leave small offerings at the edge of the forest, a bowl of rice, a warm cloak, a fresh carving of a fox, as tokens of their gratitude and hope. They called her the guardian of Yōtei. This was an identity she had never sought, but one that began to sit alongside the identity of the vengeful Onryō. It offered a flicker of light in the darkness of her purpose, a suggestion that her path did not have to end with blood, that it could lead to something resembling redemption. She tracked the fourth member of the six, the cunning spy and poisoner Chi-yi, to a bustling port town. Chi-yi had hidden herself in plain sight, running a successful tea house and weaving a web of information and influence. This was a different kind of hunt, a battle of wits in a crowded, noisy environment. Atsu had to become a different kind of ghost, blending into the crowds, listening to whispers, learning the patterns of the town. It was a slow, patient game that required her to be more than just a warrior. It required her to be a thinker, a strategist. When she finally confronted Chi-yi, it was not with a blade in the dark, but with the exposure of her treachery to her own allies, turning them against her in a web of her own making. Atsu was learning that there was more than one way to defeat an enemy, and that the most complete victory sometimes involved destroying the legacy they had built, not just their physical body. As the number of the Yōtei 6 dwindled, the remaining members grew increasingly paranoid and desperate. The leader, the man who had given the order that started it all, Lord Miyamoto, was the most dangerous of all. He was not a mere brute, he was a master strategist, a man of immense political and military power who understood the value of symbols. He knew that the ghost was more than a person, it was an idea. And to kill an idea, you had to destroy its symbol. He began to set elaborate traps, using innocent people as bait, hopping to lure the ghost into a confrontation on his terms. The final act of Atsu's long revenge was becoming a game of cat and mouse with the most powerful mouse on the island, a confrontation that would not only decide her fate, but the fate of the very spirit of Yōtei. Chapter 5. The Final Silence, From Vengeance to Vigil. Lord Miyamoto's fortress was a stark, formidable structure built into the very rock of a subordinate peak of Mount Yōtei. It was a place of cold stone and sharp angles, a monument to control and order, a direct contrast to the organic, wild beauty of the mountain it dominated. He had gathered his remaining forces here, creating a fortress within a fortress. He knew the ghost was coming for him, and he was prepared for a siege, for an assassination attempt, for anything a mere mortal could conceive. But Atsu was no longer a mere mortal. She was a force of the mountain itself. She did not attempt to scale the walls or fight through the gates. Instead, she used the mountain. She found an old, forgotten geothermal vent, a treacherous path known only to the mountain goats, and now to her. It led her through a network of caves that emerged deep within the fortress's inner keep, behind his strongest defenses. She emerged from the darkness of the earth into the darkness of the fortress, a true phantom from the depths. She moved through the hallways, disabling guards with silent, precise strikes, not killing unless necessary. Her goal was not the soldiers, it was the head of the snake. She found Lord Miyamoto in his audience chamber, standing before a large map of Izo, his fingers tracing the lands he controlled. He was an older man, his face a mask of calculated calm, but his eyes held a deep, weary tension. He was not surprised when she entered. He simply turned, setting down a delicate teacup, and regarded the figure standing in his doorway. She was not what he expected. She was not a hulking brute or a demonic apparition. She was a woman, lean and poised, her face calm, her eyes holding the ancient, unassailable silence of the deep snow. "So," he said, his voice even, "the ghost of Yōtei. I have heard many stories. I must admit, I am impressed. You took everything from me," Atsu stated, her voice flat, devoid of the screaming rage he likely anticipated. "I unified this land," he countered, gesturing to the map. "I brought order. Your village was a relic, a stubborn stone in the path of progress. It was necessary. Your order is built on the graves of the innocent," she replied, taking a step forward. "It is a hollow piece, and it ends tonight." He drew his katana, a masterwork blade that gleamed in the lamplight. It was the final, inevitable clash, the old world of honor and conquest against the new world of shadow and justice. The fight was a mirror of Atsu's entire journey. Miyamoto was technically superior, his every move a testament to a lifetime of disciplined training. But Atsu was fluid, adaptive, and fought with a purpose that went beyond technique. She was fighting for every life he had crushed, for every village he had burned, for the memory of her parents. She used the chamber itself, overturning braziers to create smoke, using the pillars for cover, her naginata a whirlwind of controlled motion. In the end, it was not a dramatic final blow, but a slow, inevitable conclusion. She wore him down, her endurance outlasting his, her will overpowering his. She disarmed him, her naginata's blade sweeping his katana from his hands. He stood before her, defeated, his chest heaving, his grand plans crumbling to dust. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw not a powerful lord, but a tired, old man who had sacrificed his humanity for an idea of power. "Finish it then," he whispered. be the monster the stories say you are. Atsu looked at him, then at the fox carving she still carried, a final reminder of who she was and where she came from. The burning need for vengeance that had sustained her for years was finally, completely spent. Killing him now would not bring her family back. It would not heal the land. It would only be another death. No, she said, her voice soft but firm. Your death will not be my redemption. Your legacy will be your punishment. She did not strike the final blow. Instead, she left him there, alive, but utterly broken. His power, his authority, his very reason for being, stripped away by the ghost he had created. She walked out of his fortress as the sun began to rise, painting the peak of Yōtei in hues of pink and gold. The vengeance was complete. The Yōtei 6 were gone. But as Atsu stood on the mountainside, looking out over the land she had fought so hard for, she realized she had no home to return to. The girl Atsu was truly gone, lost in the past. The vengeful Onryō had served its purpose and could now rest. What remained was something else, something new. She was the guardian of Yōtei. The mountain was her home, its people her charge. She had started her journey to reclaim the past, but she ended it by forging a future. She faded into the forests, not as a ghost of vengeance, but as a watchful spirit, a legend of protection, a part of the eternal, silent watch of the great mountain Yōtei. And so, the long winter of vengeance gives way to a gentle, enduring peace. The ghost finds its rest, and the mountain settles into a deep, contented silence. Let the calm of this resolution settle over you now. Let the stillness of the snow and the steadfastness of the guardian spirit ease your mind into a state of perfect tranquility. Thank you for sharing in this journey. I am sending you so much love and positive energy for a night of profound and restorative sleep. May your dreams be as peaceful as the final, quiet watch over Yōtei. Good night, everyone. See you again next time.